Excellent. All right then. Well, loads of people on the call. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. So these are the relational activism webinars, aren't they, Rich?
Yep.
And we've been doing it for 18 months now. And this year we've really got going with one a month on different topics. And, you know, our area, where we like to learn is around child protection, adult services, early help, human services. And you know, as relational activists, we believe in changing the part of the world that we can touch. And we believe in learning together and valuing lived experience. And so it's been great that we've been able to come together on these webinars and learn. And they're really about, I mean, Rich and I really like to set and go and then listen in and really benefit from the people that we kindly join us to present on these webinars. And we've got a really important topic today, Rich, one that you've done a lot of thinking about in the past as well. I remember that excellent blog that you put out a while ago about young people and participation.
Yeah, I think it's one of those areas that gets talked about quite a lot in children's social work, but it's actually surprisingly difficult to implement on the ground. It's kind of, there's lots of nice academic key type ideas about what it should be and what it should look like, but when the kind of rubber hits the road, there's a lot of challenges and obstacles that make it difficult for it to occur in a kind of meaningful way. And that's why I'm really kind of excited about today, because I think the guests we got kind of lined up are really going to help us kind of penetrate and get through some of those challenges, so that we can, you know, work with children in a really meaningful, participatory and impactful way. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Oh, excellent. And Carmen is with us. Carmen, fellow relational activist, she's just put that Rich's blog in the chat as well. If anybody wants to drop anything in the chat, then do so. Yeah. What do you reckon, Rich? Do we think we're ready to get going?
Yeah, let's make a start. Yeah. So first of all, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Jo Dillon, who I would say is probably one of the leading experts in children's participation in social work. And if you haven't kind of checked out her work through Research in Practice, or even if you YouTube her, there's an excellent lecture that she did. And I think she really shines a light on some of the challenges, but also provides a pathway for how we overcome some of those challenges so that we can engage in meaningful participatory child protection social work. And so I'm delighted to welcome her today. I'm just going to bring her in and pin her so that we can see. Over to you, Jo.
Well, that was the kindest introduction. Blimey, I don't know where to go from there. Okay, well, thank you. I mean, just to throw the compliment back, I think you and Tim are doing awesome things in obviously hosting all these webinars and making us really accountable for the way we practice and how we think. So it's my pleasure to join you today, and I feel really privileged. I think you're right. I think participation it's an ongoing dilemma. It's an ongoing discussion. It's an ongoing duty that we have as social workers, particularly in child protection. And I think one thing that really sticks out at the moment is that if you went back now 25 years ago and revisited some of June Thoburn's or old papers, you know, that were written in the late 90s, you'd probably think you were reading a paper from today. Not much seems to have changed at all. And the narrative from the children and young people doesn't seem to have moved any further on. I think research, well, particularly my research, continues to show us that children and young people still tend to be very unaware of who we are as social workers and what we're doing with them. They're still not certain who else is involved and the reason that they attend meetings about them and listen to their personal information. So they're still a little bit in the dark about that. My research has identified that children often aren't aware what's on their child protection plan. They've been told they're not maybe allowed to know, or the information is simply not shared with them anyway. So from a participatory angle, how do we then build in children's opinions about what we're doing and why we're doing it if they haven't even got the basics as to, you know, the reasons as to why we are safeguarding themselves and members of their family? So I was thinking today really about what to highlight, and it's really difficult because it's really hard to speak positively about participation without having a look at the potential barriers and challenges that we've got, that social workers in child protection are facing. And I do have to say that my research kind of stops at the child protection threshold, and Terri, I know Terri Ann's going to be giving us a load more information from a children in care perspective later on in the webinar. So firstly, I think one of the big barriers that we've got as child protection social workers is a lack of statutory guidance that really helps us as we navigate our way through processes. Now, obviously, we've got Working Together to Safeguard Children, which is a pretty robust document. However, we have a lovely new section now at the start of that called Children Have Said They Need. And it's great. It gives us a really good idea about how we can ensure children understand what we're doing and get their opinions on how they want us to move forward. However, the rest of participatory guidance is kind of scattered throughout this document instead of being held in a robust, sensible area. And it would take a very methodical social worker to keep going back and pulling out the information that they need to ensure that we are routinely embedding participation in the child and family social work that we're doing. And it's my opinion that the information in there is a little bit ambiguous as well. And I think if you're a newly qualified social worker, it can be even harder to extract exactly what is expected of you. And this then brings us towards the different local authority policies. So every local authority has their own ways of working, their own ideas as to how old children could and should be to meaningfully be engaged in their own plans. This is really, really different. You know, it's not routine. And, you know, all over the world, different countries have different levels and expectations of when we should be taking children's opinions into account. And our law, you know, looking at the law for section 17 and 47, we lack that clarity. And again, it comes down to a local authority decision as to when we should invite children to their meetings. And Working Together says we should always be sharing information with children. But then the research disputes this, and we have children that are spoken to by Dr. Clive Diaz, by myself, by Kerry Mwench, Karen Winter, that hold good insight into what's going on in their child protection plans, but then some that have no clue. So, for example, I interviewed one almost 13-year-old who had been told she had to wait another 2 years before being invited to her own child protection conference, or really understanding the reasons as to why she was on a child protection plan. So at the age of almost 13, she had no idea of what social work professionals were saying was not safe within her family, which is astounding, really. But then, you know, when you trace it back to newly qualified social workers going into the workplace, are we actually giving them the information they need to confidently know what they can and should be sharing with children and making them aware? Because it's a scary thing, isn't it? Choosing this, you know, we have this notion of age-appropriate practice, but if you're new to the profession, I remember that feeling in my tummy of, should I say this? Do I say this? Am I allowed to say this? And if you've got a manager that isn't being really clear about this with you, then it becomes quite a daunting prospect. We also have, as a little bit of a barrier in participation, we have very vague terms that are floating about. And most of you on this call will be really familiar with the term wishes and feelings that's bandied about on a daily basis. And you might have a manager that says, did you get wishes and feelings? Have you seen and spoken to the child? Have you done direct work? What's the child's lived experience? What's the child's voice? And again, if you're new to the profession, these terms are so woolly that it can be very, very hard to really pinpoint what they mean and what we actually have to be doing with them. So at this point, I advise anyone that worries about these generic terms to maybe spend some time tracking them back. So for example, if we think about the term wishes and feelings, go back and actually look at section 17 and section 47 and see how it's clarified within the legislation. So for example, you'll find that section 17 says that as child and family social workers, we need to be clarifying the children's wishes and feelings on the services we're providing to the family and themselves. And for section 47, it says we need to be getting wishes and feelings regarding the actions we're taking in respect to the child and their family. Now that's huge, isn't it? Because that puts a context on this vagueness and whimsical notion of wishes and feelings. So if you're ever told to go and gather wishes and feelings, we've got to think, okay, well, what's the purpose of this? What specifically do I need to be seeking a child's opinion on? But more importantly, what do we do with it when we've gathered it? So, you know, anyone can gather, we can all gather wishes and feelings, but how do we then respond and act upon these? And I think this is where my research tries to really draw it together as being clear that participation, in my eyes, is a cycle. It's an iterative cycle where we share information with a child, we seek their opinions or wishes and feelings upon it. We then go ahead and develop this relationship, which means that we're consistently going back and rechecking this information with the child, because it's not static, is it? It's not something that we do. We don't tick a box and go, yay, you got wishes and feelings. It's going to change. It's going to change daily, weekly, monthly, depending on the other stuff that we're doing with the family, or just quite simply how the child is feeling that day. You know, that's going to change. So when we've taken these wishes and feelings to a decision-making arena, like a child in need meeting, child protection case conference, and then we're going to go back to the child and say, okay, this is the response. What do you think about that? And they give their opinions again. So we never go back to that initial starting point. It's always new. We're building on this process. But that's all just dead easy to say, isn't it? So how do we actually go about it? And how do you know what you're allowed to do? And this is the challenge. So myself, Fionn Evans, who's a senior lecturer over at Manchester Metropolitan University, and Rod Kippen, who's a youth engagement worker and artist at the Horsefall Gallery in 42nd Street in Manchester, we were brought together by Research and Practice, and we devised a tool that I've just seen has been very kindly posted in the chat box, so that's brilliant. And what we tried to do was draw on the theoretical principles, the legislative principles, the discussion, the debate, the challenges that are all going on in practice at the moment, and try and create something that social workers can pick up and use in practice. So Fionn and I draw heavily on the relationship building section in relation to the applying of Laura Lundy's participatory model, Roger Hart, Harry Shire's, Harry Ferguson's beautiful work, and Karen Winter's work on how we actually build and sustain relationships with very young children and how we move in those relationships. And it got us thinking about this notion of the child's voice. And Laura Lundy encapsulates it beautifully in her theory. But it made me, Rod and Fionn, just think about this notion of speaking and tone, and how sometimes we come to focus perhaps a little bit too much on these verbal conversations. So it made us try and really think outside our comfort zones and start to place our means of communication with every individual child as a unique experience, therefore drawing on how we liaise with that child and work with that child should be in the manner that they choose. So yeah, it may be sitting and having a conversation, but it also may be collaging, taking photos, leaving video or voice messages for each other. Could be through the mode of TikToks, interpretive dance, walking throughout your community and mapping areas of importance to you. And once we've done that and established how we can better understand children's wishes and feelings about the actions we're taking or the services we're providing, as social workers, then we need to think about, okay, well, how do we present this to the other people in this multi-agency perspective, like the decision makers? So we've been spending a lot of time with social work practitioners in Greater Manchester. We've just finished an impact project over in the South Yorkshire Teaching Partnership, where we've explored how IROs and child protection chairs would feel about having Spotify playlists within their child protection conferences, tangible objects, photographs, instead of predefined, pre-prescribed templates, like the 3 houses, perhaps that may be a little bit overused, very tenuous now links to wishes and feelings, and generic to a point now where we all use them. We use them in schools. Anything that's in a black and white toolkit, we have to pause and think, okay, what's unique about this? And how does that fit with the child that I'm working with? And should we not be seeing what the child wants to do with us before going with this predefined notion of, okay, I'm coming and you will complete this template and that will meet our requirements. So it's about flipping it and letting the child come to us and and taking it from there. So very quick snapshot of everything, I guess, that's going on with regards to our research and taking it forward. So Rich, I don't know if there's anything there that you'd like clarifying. I feel like I've just vomited participation all over you.
It was very colourful, beautiful vomiting. It was really, there was so much there, wasn't there, Rich?
Yeah, it was brilliant. And I really like that idea of getting feedback about what actions we're taking and the support that we're provided and the degree to which they think it's helpful or whether it's making a difference. I remember a parent that I worked with, she told me that she was sexually abused when she was a child by a male family member, and she eventually disclosed it in school. And then she, the social workers basically came to remove her, and they came to the house. But what they said to her is, "Oh, we're just going to take you for a drive," and then they ended up accommodating her. And in her recalling of this, she said her child itself was really confused about this because her mum was crying and yet they were just going for a drive. So she couldn't work out why her mum was so distressed. And then when she was taken away, she felt upset because she'd been lied to and she'd been placed with strangers. And they were told, like, "Oh, it's not your fault, it's not your fault." And yet at the same time, it didn't feel like it wasn't her fault because she felt like she was being punished. And then they had the other kind of complication of the fact that that the person who abused her told her that if she were to ever tell somebody, she would be taken away and she would be removed by her mum. And so when she was put into care, she felt like what said was going to happen was what in fact did happen. Now, I'm kind of hoping that in today that wouldn't happen. But I suppose the reason why I share that example, because it illustrates the kind of ongoing traumatic effect of children not having an explanation about why things are happening in their life. And although I'm sure the social workers in that moment, or for that child, was acting kind of child protectively, that's not how the child interpreted it. They felt like they were being subject to this kind of traumatic separation from their mum, and weren't given a very good explanation as to why. So I suppose when you were talking, it kind of brought to mind that experience I had with that parent.
Yeah, I think I do worry about whether social workers are very, very clear about what's expected of them. And I know that in the large study a few years ago, my PhD study, 5 of the social workers that I interviewed from one local authority, none of them were aware that they were meant to take out child protection plans or minutes of meetings and actually sit and go through them with the child. And it was quite a revelation for them. And when I drew their attention back to working together, it was like, oh, okay. So again, it's very hard, isn't it? When you're new to the profession, or even old to the profession, but your local authority maybe isn't being explicit about what's required from you. It can be incredibly, it can be very difficult, can't it? Because it sets us off completely on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I think it can be incredibly difficult. And I think when we're thinking about trauma-informed practice, one of the things, what a traumatic event is kind of, it's defined by 2 elements, really. You have like the frightening and overwhelming experience, and then you have the lack of support with adults around you to help make sense of what happened. And so I think our role as social workers is to help children make sense of what's happening in and around them. And that in of itself can act as like that is trauma-informed practice. So us learning to be comfortable and being courageous in having conversations about difficult subjects like violence or sexual abuse is a way of us acting in a kind of trauma-informed, participatory way.
Yeah.
Well, and I thought that that sort of baggy, slippery concept of wishes and feelings, that really resonated with me, and how that there's infinite potential both in connecting, communicating, talking to young people, that all of those rich ideas there. I know a couple of people Jason just said in the chat about the music playlist. I really like that one of walking in the community and mapping and sort of experiencing the community together with young people. That one really got me. So all of that potential in the connecting and the gathering, and then in how you communicate it in that professional context, is infinite potential for doing it differently and doing it creatively there, isn't there? And then when I think about the creative approaches, a person that always springs to mind is Terri actually, and that's who we're going to hear from next. How you doing, Terri?
I'm good now. I've unmuted it without taking too long.
Yeah. I know you've got your hoodie there, I see.
Yes, we're here representing for Naya, as always.
There we go. That's good product placement there.
Yes, nice little plug at the start there, thank you.
And like we're interested in stories. I think we're getting to understand now the power of stories in our work, and the potential for stories to give hope, and also to sort of communicate compassion as well. And we met when I came up to Leeds, and I remember there instantly hearing you talk and hearing the stories you were telling, and yeah, it's been nice to connect with you then and since. And
oh, you're being modest. We've been stuck like glue ever since.
I was going to tell another story then, but perhaps we should move to what I know you were going to kind enough to share with us some of your experiences, Terri, and maybe think a bit about your experiences as a child in care, and then to move to talk. I'd really like to hear as well about your work that you're doing now in supporting young people in a creative way. So did you want to
yeah, let's go. So to those that don't know me, I am care experience myself. I think I have a slight advantage to the majority of the people in the call, in the sense of I don't have the title of social worker, so that in the nicest way possible makes my engagement with young people a completely different path to yours, and it makes it slightly easier. So there's my advantage. I'm a bit of an open book within reason with my young people, and because a lot of the people I work with come from the area that I've grown up and live, I have connections to their families from all different ages. So there's a different level of engagement because we have a knowledge of each other outside of that professional capacity, but at times it's skewered boundaries as well, but it's a learning curve. So my experience in care is my family was part of the cycle of abuse and care for 2 generations before myself and my siblings. I was a young carer to my siblings due to my mum and dad's addiction. They tried their best to instill boundaries verbally, but actions tended to contradict everything that was said. And I was basically left alone to parent my brother and sister, and my childhood went out the window. At 14, I went on a trip with school to represent the UK in a dance competition, and I got really ill abroad and came back home. My mum didn't come to hospital, and that was the last night I spent at home. I made a call to emergency social workers and I just said, I can't do this anymore. I physically and mentally couldn't handle my mum's addiction and trying to parent her and my siblings and somewhere myself. That was the hardest decision I ever made in my whole entire life. However, now it's the best decision I ever made in my whole entire life. My experience when I first went into care really damaged me, in the sense of all I knew was to care for other people. That's all I'd ever known. It was instinctually inside me. It's written in my file. I've still heard it in recent days now, that whenever there's a crisis or something goes wrong, Terri Ann goes out the window, my Batman mask comes on, I am there to save the day, with no consideration of how that affects me, because that's my survival mode. That's all I've ever known. When I got put into care, I was with my brother and sister at first, which was a saving grace, because I was always told by my mum and dad, if I ever opened my trap and went into care, the first thing they're going to do is split us all up. They knew that that was my weakness, my brother and sister. We lasted together for about 7 months. There was a breakdown in the placement because the carers had never had girls before. They only had boys naturally, and they'd never fostered any girls. So me and my sister were the first. So you've got me, I wouldn't say problematic, but yes, a problematic teenage tearaway that thought she knew everything, but only knew how to care for people. And then you had my little sister, who she just shied away from everything, was really hard to engage with anything. And then they had my brother, who was 3 at the time, lots of behaviour issues just from what he'd grown up around. And all he knew, even though I tried my best to teach him that I was his sister, was that I was his mum. I provided the majority of his care. The first night in this foster home, my brother did what he did every single night. 1 o'clock in the morning, he would get out of his bed, come into my bedroom and get in the end of the bed and go to sleep. That had gone on for about 2 years before we got taken into care. Not because anything bad was happening in the night at home, just I guess that was just his safe space when he woke up in the night. And I'd usually wake in the morning, he'd be sat at the end of my bed, earphones on, sat in his nappy, listening to Bob the Builder, and he was quite happy and content with himself until I woke up. My foster mum walked in that morning and told us how dirty and disgusting we were. That instantly put barriers for me engaging with them people. They then told me constantly for the first month, stop bothering about Liam, go be a kid, go be a kid, go be a kid. I didn't know how to be a kid. And I didn't know then what I know now, which I was suffering with the form of postnatal depression. Because although I didn't have that biological maternal instinct for my brother, that's all I knew was to care for, protect, and stop anything bad happening to my siblings. And then suddenly, as a young teenager, I was told to just go and be a teenager. So as you can imagine, went off to become more of a rebel without a cause. I'm only going to keep that bit short because I could go on for a long, long time. But it really, really messed me up. You know, the separation from my brother and sisters, because eventually they did separate me from them in that home. And I just went off. I felt like I had no one. I couldn't see my brother and sister when I wanted to. I had no one to protect. I had no one to care for. I clearly wasn't loved or cared for by these people, because every time I did what kids that are upset did and acted out, packed my bags and sent me on. But as parents, we don't do that to our kids, do we? We're meant to teach them. We're meant to help them to navigate through these issues that they're feeling and the things that they're facing. But as a foster child, not every foster care I'm going to tarnish with that brush, but the majority of the time, if it's too much for their remit, they're well within the rights to say, actually, I'm done, and off you go. As a parent, I have 3 of them. You can't do that. You can't. You have to work through it. So it became a point of becoming a rebel without a cause, and had to make many mistakes and do many sillier things that I probably wouldn't have done if I'd had the right hands guiding me. Now I'm a big lady, and with all that experience, and like I say, that's just a snippet, I decided the system's still as messed up now as it was when my mum was in care, as it was when I was in care. I'm aware of this. I've got a very big mouth. I've been labelled for that. So how can I use that to my advantage? So I started Naya, another plug there. And that's my advocacy service for young people in and leaving care. But I also extended it to just those with complex needs, because there is that much going on in the world now. There's kids that are not quite in care, but they're on the borderline, but they've still got them same needs. So basically any young person that needs help finding their voice and using it in a way that is going to be constructive to them and it's going to benefit them. So that brings me on to then, as Tim mentioned earlier, we met at uni. That was another hard experience as an adult care leaver, because post 30, when you go to uni, you don't get no support, even though you're a care leaver. That status means absolutely nothing, just that you're going to beg the uni for a lot more time and money and help and understanding that sometimes you'll get and sometimes you won't. Me and Tim engage quite regularly, even if I've just got a few issues, and he can kind of help me map it out in my head, because I'm a bit of an overthinker. And one day we were having a chat. I came up with an idea because he wanted me to do some of the stories that he posts on a Friday about people's experience. And as great as that was, I thought, well, I tell the story and I talk the story. Is there another way that can be a bit more impactful? So I thought of the idea of a chain poem. Now, back in the days, before we had technology and someone had a brainwave to think of a pigeon carrier, people would use chain letters and messages to try and convey mass opinions as a form of, petitioning or protesting, to make people understand that there's more than one person that feels a certain way. So I thought, well, why can't we do that as a poem? That we have young people have their way of rebelling, which is, I'm going to go outside and be really loud and cause trouble. Protesters, where they're allowed nowadays, will go and have a protest. Creatives, I don't know, sometimes they will, sometimes they just want to be creative. So we've come up with a poem. Now it's been really hard because I had 3 different versions of this poem. The first one was about, the system being broken. That was the idea, because if the system wasn't broken, every single one of us in this call would not be here right now trying to make them small changes from within, because we know outside structurally we can't do anything. The research has been there for years showing that it is what it is. So we come together as activists. The first version didn't really put my heart into it, as in it just showed that the system was broken, which we already knew. The second version kind of showed a bit of the trauma, but didn't really show actually. The third version shows we have trauma, the system is aware of the trauma, but yet still contributes to the trauma that we already had and then makes it worse. So I thought I'd combine all 3 of them together. And the aim of this is it's going to be posted on the website, and we're hoping, so anyone who's in the call that wants to get involved, please feel free. We want more care experienced people to add on to it, and we want to follow it, and we want to try and make it the biggest chain poem ever. Even if no one ever gets to read the full version of it, but can only relate to one part of it, it might make a difference. So I hope you will all join in, those who would like to, and get your pen to paper. I'm going to read it for you, and hopefully when it's published you'll be able to read it and yourselves and follow on. I'm a bit nervous now, as you can tell, because I don't get lost for words often. So it's called If the System Wasn't Broken. If the system wasn't broken, perhaps I would have felt less frown. Growing up without parents to be spoken wouldn't have felt like a breakdown. If the system wasn't broken, maybe my scars wouldn't be so deep. I wouldn't have felt so awoken from the nights trying not to sleep. If the system wasn't broken, maybe I could trust again. I wouldn't feel outspoken with my distrust of worldly men. If the system wasn't broken, maybe I could find my feet. Maybe I wouldn't be so woken from the nightmares I still meet. If the system wasn't broken, maybe I could feel whole. Maybe I wouldn't be outspoken when I'm judging the system's role. But the system is broken, and I'm just a statistic. a number that can be woken to prove just how I misfit. The trauma inflicted deeply, all because of the system's flaws, the nights spent crying me to sleep. Sorry, one child has just walked in. I'm just working, I'll be 2 minutes. Go and ask your brother. Thank you. Sorry about that. I forgot where I got to. The trauma inflicted deeply, or because of a system's flaw, the nights spent crying me to sleep, and the memories I can't withdraw. A trauma-informed system could have been my saving grace, but in reality, it's all too dreary. It feels like I'm a hopeless race. If only I had a steady hand to guide me through the fog, maybe I wouldn't be so bland, just another broken log. The system may be broken, but I'm stronger than that. I will not be a mere token, because my future's where it's at. We put our trust in those in power to help us find a way, but they need to walk the walk, not just cower, and truly hear what we say. But I won't give up, no, not me, for I know there must be a way to make a difference and to be a light in the darkness, come what may. So let's piece the system back together and make it what it's meant to be, where trauma survivors can weather the storm and come out feeling free. So let me break the cycle, let me be the change we need, for I know I'm not an obstacle, but rather a growing seed. Together we can make a difference and bring justice to our calls for a brighter and safer existence, and to ensure others never fall. The journey is long, but it's not in vain, and with every step we'll pave the way for a system that's truly humane, because it's time to break that chain. Broken systems, broken statistics, feels like I don't have a choice. I need to shout it loud and proud, you'll never break our voice. So my story may just be the start of an activist revolution, I'm told, where trauma survivors find their heart and come together with love and stand strong and bold. So heed my words and take them in. For a better system, we must begin. And with that, my final line is through. And to the next poet, the pen is for you.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, I got a bit emotional in that there.
Yeah. You're a rebel with the cause now.
Yes, I am. Child, 1 second.
No worries, no worries. Well, yeah, I've long known about Terri Ann's articulacy, but with the voice, but I haven't heard that poem before, and that was wonderful. And as Terri Ann said at the end, she's really opening up an invitation for others to write their poems as well. That's right, isn't it, Terri Ann?
Yeah, please.
Passing the pen and the baton. Yeah.
Please. I want to see this grow. You know, I'd like it to go global if possible, but national I'll settle with for now.
Oh, yeah. And I think just one on as a professional, in quote marks, in the system, I get owning the harm and the in the system is a really important thing, I think, for me, and the fact that you name it so clearly is grateful for that, Terri Ann. We're actually up against time, but I really wanted to hear. Do you want to give us in a couple of minutes, like what you're doing, a bit more on what you're doing now?
Yeah, so when I started at uni, I went to a project local to me, which some people have heard about already. It was called the Gang Project Community Tackle It, and it was lottery funded. And it was working with young people that were at risk of or already affiliated to gangs, which were quite prevalent in the area in which we live. So when I first started this work, I went to just go and deliver some sessions that I developed to young people, just to give them some awareness about de-glorifying criminality, knowing their rights in stop and search, understanding how a criminal charge can affect them later on in life. And it was just generic workshops. And within the first 3 weeks, I picked up that there was some amazing young people, had loads to say, really valid opinions, weren't getting that attention, didn't have the resources, and it was making them angry. So they were rebelling against, hence affiliation to the gangs. So I asked them how they'd feel about putting together maybe a youth council or just something where they could have a voice and find out what was going on in their area and how can they put steps into place to try and fix it. So we started with just running our own youth club. We did some research. I asked the young people what do they want, and they said, well, we don't know what's going on in the community. So off we went, we set some questions for people that live locally. They went, did some research, and then they came back and put together a plan that they wanted a youth club. They wanted community forums every 2 months where we invited parents and professionals to come in to say what was going on and how could they contribute to fixing it. That lasted for 2 years where they were planning and running their own youth club. Then we went into lockdown and I stepped away. Came back and they'd all kind of left school and gone on to do exams, but we're still at a loss because they'd started this project and not finished it. So I brought them all back together on the understanding that we were going to pay for the ILM Level 3 Institutional Leadership and Management qualification, which would enable them to then go off to work in schools, to be mentors, to basically a qualification that we get at our time in life, really. We also started a girls' football team, to which those that were interested in sports, I gave them opportunities to come. They could get level 1 in coaching, they could get experience depending on what route they wanted to go down. It might have been physio and so on. There's some pictures there of our journey.
Oh, there's us in Leeds, actually.
Yeah, this is when I first met, so that's what brought us here. That's the last one.
So this is lovely.
So these are some of the things that they've put together. This was an event that they put together to raise money for the club. They did bag packing in the local supermarket. They had to go and source prizes for a raffle, so they had to go and talk businesses into donating things to them. I took young people on training courses so that they could become mentors. What's this one? Just upskilling them all. This is all the partnership working that the young people had to do. So they had to engage with the police and Sport England and Leeds City Council about what they felt and what they needed. That was the research they did with the community, where they put questions and invited parents to answer. This is our team, our amazing team that are getting affiliated next season. We started out with 2 girls. We now have 89 girls. We have an under 13s, under 14s, under 9s, under 8s teams. So hopefully we'll be winning some trophies. We then, some of the young leaders decided actually the girls don't feel empowered in sport because we weren't feeling the equal access in the club. So we created a youth club to empower young women in the world of sport. Then we tried to think, okay, lots of kids have got parents that have started up small businesses during lockdown. How can we improve the life of the kids we're working with? Well, if we give opportunities to their parents, that brings in resources, therefore improves their lives. Then we also realised the girls weren't getting any funding, so we got all the old used boots from the back and decided to start a social action project. All of these were ideas from the young people. So these are some of the young people that have gone on. There's a young male. He's now gone on to start his own project working, supporting parents whose young people are in gangs, and he mentors in schools. Another young man works with SEN children in a primary school now. Another one is mentoring, and she just basically volunteers in anything she can get involved in the community. That's the one who's sleeping. She's my little twinnie. We're born on the same day, clearly 20 odd years apart. And then the other young lady at the bottom started out really lacked confidence, really high risk of gang affiliation, and she's now doing she's a chef and doing her qualification alongside. All of them get given opportunities to do paid sessional work around Leeds, whether it's festivals, schools, career fairs.
Terri, and that's really wonderful. That's very joyful to see that and see all those images on screen and all those young people and the ripples. And it's like, what is it? You started with 2 and now it's 89, and it's like, yeah, getting bigger. So we're really so grateful for you joining today and sharing all that with us. We dropped the Naya link into the chat as well.
Thank you.
And we'll get that, we'll circulate the poem and get that going. And I wanted to bring in that kind of community action and groups. We'll really connect with our next speaker. And so I think Suraya is there on screen now. How you doing, Suraya?
Oh, yeah, welcome to.
Hello. Sorry, we're running over time a little bit, but it's really nice to see you. Those of you that are at our event in King's Cross in February, our Valentine's event, will remember Suraya because she talked so well about growing up in Euston and her connections to community. So we really wanted to include you in this conversation. And I think that is Musa with you at the moment, Suraya? Yeah. Is Naima here as well, or I don't know if she
yes.
could. Yeah.
I've got our guest speakers with us too.
Oh, cool. Okay, cool. All right. Well, yeah, did you want to sort of take it from there kind of thing? Yeah, cheers, Tim. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Naima, can you just turn your camera on so I can see?
We can pin you to the screen then, that's the thing. Yeah. I think the thing that I really wanted Soraya, to come on board with this is both your experiences, Soraya, as a young person growing up, but also all the community work you're involved in, and particularly a really good example of co-production and co-working in the community, which is Camden Giving, which is a really excellent thing you're involved in, isn't it? So, how are you getting on there, Rich?
Yeah, she.
Do you want to?
She's just under us. She's going to use a pseudonym, so I'm just making sure I click on the right.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, so I'm joined by two guest speakers, Jewel and Musa from Camden Giving.
Yeah. Well, Soraya, do you want to keep going, and then Rich can see if he can work the technology out behind the scenes.
It's all sorted.
Sounds good. Thank you. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having us for your seminar. I think it's been an honour to hear from our speakers so far. So a bit of background on me, as Tim mentioned, I'm actually a social work student, so for me to be in this space, it's just fantastic because I'm learning so much from everyone with lived experiences and the professional expertise of colleagues here today. And I'm actually also sharing this space with two of my colleagues from Camden Giving, Musa and Jewel, whose identity has been protected with using a pseudonym. But yeah, we're all sort of here to speak about young people's participation and engagement in child protection work, but also widely looking at social work, youth work, sort of our roles in the different communities that we're a part of. And I've got a set of questions that I'll be posing to my two guests. So yeah, I think I'll kickstart with my first, which is, what does participation mean to you? And Musa, I'll come to you first.
Well, participation for me, specifically speaking, I'd say is getting involved and saying your opinion. Because we're talking about child protection in particular, I think a lot of the time that we work with children, it tends to be adults that dictate what happens with the children, and rather than them getting a voice, the adults come along and they say, "Oh, this is best for you because we say so," and they don't actually get a voice in the matter, so they tend to get left out. Even though the service is for them, they miss out on the key parts of the service because what the children need is not in there.
I'm sort of building on that, Musa. I know that like at Camden Giving, we do things quite differently, don't we? And like, how does participation at Camden Giving and like what we do as like grant panelists, how is that really supported in changing that narrative of not listening to young people?
The grant giving at Camden Giving, it was very youth-led. So what it was is, we have people my age, 19 and under. We had a lot of people who are young giving opinions and voicing where funding should go towards, in which youth clubs and which projects. So I think it was very useful, because if you have the younger people choosing where the funding goes, they have a more rough idea of what people their age would want to do, rather than where the money would be best at. So that could be football, that could be sports, that could be a cooking club, that could be a trip out, it could be going abroad. So I think that if you're going to fund a youth sector, it's a good idea to ask the youth in that area of what they prefer to do, of what they like. And I think we targeted that by having the youth choose where the funding goes.
Fantastic, thanks for that. I mean, yeah, for a bit of context for those who might not be familiar with Camden Giving, it's a participatory grant funding network where residents are sort of sit as part of a panel that awards grants to the community. And it's sort of taking in that lived experience, everything that we've sort of mentioned this morning about having people with lived experiences pioneering the work and making those key decisions as part of like the trustees and everyone else that makes up our community. So yeah, and I'll move to Jewel. Jewel, what does participation mean to you?
Hi, sorry my camera doesn't work. Can you all hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We can. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so participation to me means to be fully immersed in an experience and also see the outcome. So as a young person, we're often used as a tick box where our participation is literally just limited to being there or engaging in a very basic activity. Then after that, we're just cast aside. So I think it's important that participation for whatever group of people means something to the participator. So since our input needs to be necessary to some degree, I feel that that like we should have a say in things. And I also think it's important that we see the final result on what we've helped work to achieve, since we deserve to see like what we've helped to create.
Fantastic. And Jules, while I have you, can you tell me a time where a professional supported you and how was it helpful?
Yeah, so I was between the ages of 8 to 11. My mum was in a domestic violence situation, and we had to move between 3 accommodations because in 2 of those, the families that we were sharing the place with were being very verbally abusive. So on top of that, everything was just really stressful for me, especially being a child. And so I think the most beneficial thing to me was when the social workers would just let us go on trips, and it just allowed me to forget what was happening, even if it was for a brief moment, and just enjoy the fact that, first of all, I'm out of my house, I'm in a different place, I can act as though it's a holiday, even though I know what we're really there for. So I feel like that was such a pivotal moment for me, and I really appreciate everything they did to make it feel that nothing's wrong, like everything's all normal again. I really enjoyed that.
That's so great to hear, like sort of like the approach
Oh, Suraya, we're losing your sound a bit. Everybody else getting the robot. Yeah. Maybe Suraya, can you hear me?
Really,
I don't know if you can maybe mute her, Rich. And we've put the Camden Giving links in the chat. And hey, Suraya, you turn your camera off now. Maybe the sound will work. Do you want to give it another go?
Yeah.
Yeah. The sound went off a bit then, but I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's the camera.
Yeah, we're actually just finishing up. Got a couple of minutes. So just saying how that Camden. Do you want to say a bit more about Camden Giving, because it's such a brilliant example of co-production and of young people working with the council. Do you want to give us like a minute or two on that, and then we'll finish up?
Yeah, for definite. My apologies. I might keep the camera off. And Tim, let me know if you do lose me.
Yeah, no worries. No, yeah.
Okay, good. But yeah, no, Camden Giving is a participatory grant funding organisation. It's a charity based in Camden. And essentially they're sort of like the bridge between the community and like the really big partners that we've got, like Google, sort of all the neighbours that we share that fund into our communities. And the way that they work is very different. So because they're participatory, they recruit residents from the local area, so from different parts of Camden, to sit on different panels. And Musa and George today are actually, and myself, we were all part of the Future Change Makers panel, where it's all young people. And we had, I think it was about 70,000 to 90,000 pounds of money per year to award to different youth charities that we felt like really strongly by, but that we also had lived experiences of. And I think what's so amazing about Camden Giving is they really listen to the voices of not only young people, but just wider resident citizens that are affected by different things like poverty, like deprivation of liberty, like just of so many different things. A lot of people who also had actually care leaver experience, and yeah, use that to sort of shape where the next funding should go, in hopes to better strengthen our communities. And I think it's actually an approach that's being widely adopted now in the grant funding world. And it's really proven to have amazing effects for charities, for organisations, but also for the people that are benefiting from such services. So yeah, I think it just proves to speak about how amazing.
Well, you know, Suraya, let me finish on this, and it makes me feel really hopeful on social work, because you know, Suraya is trained as a social worker now, but to have social workers coming through who've got that deep connection with community, and Suraya, you're such a skilled facilitator and connector, and we're really pleased to be working with you and bringing on board to hear that authentic voice from Musa and from Jewel there was really phenomenal. So really appreciate it. And fresh back from Turkey as well, just yesterday, wasn't it, or the day before? So yeah. Brilliant. All right. Thank you to everybody that's come to the webinar. We really appreciate it. We like to make a point of finishing roughly on time, but it's been a really good one, hasn't it, Rich?
Yeah, it's been outstanding, and I hope we tried to offer something where you could have multiple levels in terms of where you can pitch participation. So the kind of front end child protection perspective, and then obviously with Terri and the being much more invested in the community and bringing in that lived experience, and then Suraya and her colleagues in terms of it being more community orientated again. And so participation isn't just kind of one level going in, it's multiple levels. And so we just wanted to bring some of that, really.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to Joe as well for really laying the foundations there with that expertise. And we really appreciate it. And yeah, we've got the links in the chat, so do connect. Nice to see that some people are saying they're going to come again. So that's good. And then there'll be another webinar next month. So check it out on the website, and we look forward to seeing you all again, and take care of yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.